The autumn of 1845 brought relentless rain to Thornwick Hall, as if the heavens themselves were determined to match the gloom that had settled over the once magnificent estate. Water streamed down cracked window panes and seeped through neglected sections of the roof, creating a symphony of drips that echoed through the cavernous halls. The gardens, once the pride of Derbyshire, had surrendered to wilderness, hedges untrimmed, flower beds choked with weeds, and pathways nearly impassable. Inside, Lord Thomas Maddox, the 8th Duke of Halewood, sat motionless in his study, a tumbler of brandy clutched in his hand as he stared unseeing at the dying embers in the grate. At 32, the Duke had become a ghost in his own home, haunting its rooms with hollow eyes and a countenance that rarely betrayed emotion. The servants whispered that he had not smiled since the deaths of his wife and infant son 3 years prior, victims of a fever that had swept through the county with merciless efficiency. Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper who had served Thornwick for nearly 4 decades, observed her employer with mounting concern. The staff had dwindled to a skeleton crew as finances grew strained and the Duke's indifference to his surroundings became increasingly apparent. Something needed to be done, but at 72, Mrs. Winters found herself unable to manage the deteriorating estate alone. With trembling hands, she had finally penned an advertisement for a new housekeeper to assist her, hoping to find someone with both skill and spirit enough to breathe life back into Thornwick Hall, and perhaps its master. What she had not anticipated was the young woman who arrived on that rain-soaked October morning, clutching a battered valise and wearing a plain grey dress that had seen better days. Miss Olivia Mercer, the woman announced, her voice steady despite her bedraggled appearance. "I've come about the housekeeper position." Mrs. Winters eyed the newcomer with skepticism. "You're quite young for such a responsibility, Miss Mercer." "I am 26, Mrs. Winters, and I assure you I have ample experience in household management." Olivia's chin lifted slightly, a gesture that spoke of pride carefully contained. "I served as housekeeper at Bellwood Manor for 5 years and have excellent references." "And why did you leave Bellwood?" Mrs. Winters asked, ushering the young woman into the servants' hall and away from the persistent draught that plagued the entrance. A shadow crossed Olivia's features. The family's circumstances changed. They were forced to reduce staff. Mrs. Winters nodded, recognizing the careful phrasing that often disguised financial ruin. "We have our own challenges here at Thornwick. The Duke, he is not as he once was." "I understand grief, Mrs. Winters," Olivia said quietly. "And I am not easily discouraged." There was something in the young woman's steady gaze that gave Mrs. Winters pause. Perhaps what Thornwick needed was not another aging servant counting the days until retirement, but someone with the energy and determination to fight against the decay that threatened to consume the estate and its master. "Very well, Miss Mercer. Let us discuss the particulars." The Duke was not informed of the new appointment until the following morning, when Mrs. Winters brought his breakfast tray personally, a task usually delegated to a footman, but one she had taken upon herself since the household changes began. "I've hired an assistant housekeeper, Your Grace," she informed him, setting down the tray on a table littered with untouched correspondence. "Miss Mercer began her duties yesterday." Thomas barely glanced up from the newspaper he was not reading. "As you see fit, Mrs. Winters. She has already begun organizing the linen inventory and plans to address the East Wing's dampness issue today." This elicited a slight frown. "The East Wing is closed." "Yes, Your Grace, but the moisture is spreading to adjacent areas. Miss Mercer believes it must be addressed before winter sets in fully." The Duke returned to his feigned reading. "Do what you must." Mrs. Winters hesitated, then added, "She has also requested permission to review the household accounts. I believe she may have ideas for economies that would allow us to rehire some necessary staff." Thomas set down his paper, irritation flashing across his features. "Is this woman under the impression that she is to manage my financial affairs as well as my linens?" "No, Your Grace," Mrs. Winters replied calmly. "She merely wishes to ensure that what limited funds are allocated to household maintenance are used to maximum effect." The Duke's jaw tightened. "Tell Miss Mercer to confine her attentions to dust and dampness. My finances are not her concern." "As you wish, Your Grace." Mrs. Winters curtsied and turned to leave, but paused at the door. She reminds me somewhat of her Grace, the late Duchess. That same practical mind. She departed before the Duke could respond, leaving him to stare after her with an expression caught between anger and pain. Olivia Mercer spent her first week at Thornwick Hall in a whirlwind of activity. She rose before dawn each day, working methodically through the massive house, cataloguing every crack in the plaster, every stain on the carpet, every piece of furniture in need of repair. The servants, initially wary of the newcomer who spoke with the refinement of someone above her station, gradually warmed to her as she worked alongside them, never asking more than she was willing to do herself. She encountered the Duke only once during that first week, when she entered the library to assess the condition of the books and found him standing at the window, staring out at the rain-soaked grounds. "Forgive me, Your Grace," she said, dropping into a curtsy. "I did not realize the room was occupied." Thomas turned, regarding her with cool detachment. "You must be the new housekeeper." "Yes, Your Grace." "Olivia Mercer." "Miss Mercer." He nodded stiffly. "Mrs. Winters tells me you have been quite industrious." "There is much to be done before winter, Your Grace." "Indeed." He turned back to the window. "Carry on with your assessment, Miss Mercer. Don't let me impede your duties." Olivia hesitated, then moved to examine the bookshelves, acutely aware of the Duke's presence as she worked. She noted the magnificent collection, many volumes rare and valuable, but also the neglect evident in the layer of dust that coated each leather spine. "Your library is remarkable, Your Grace," she ventured after several minutes of silence. "It would benefit from proper care." "Would it?" he replied without turning. "To what end, Miss Mercer?" "The books sit unread. Beauty and knowledge need no justification for their preservation, Your Grace," she answered quietly, running her finger along a gilded spine. "And what seems without purpose today may become essential tomorrow." Thomas turned, studying her with an expression she could not decipher. "You speak like a woman educated beyond her station." Olivia met his gaze steadily. "I had the privilege of learning from my father, who valued knowledge regardless of one's circumstances." "And what circumstances brought you to Thornwick, Miss Mercer?" "The same that bring anyone to seek employment, Your Grace." "Necessity." Something in her tone, neither apologetic nor challenging, merely matter-of-fact, caught Thomas's attention. He regarded her more carefully, noting the simple but immaculate dress, the way she held herself with quiet dignity, the intelligence in her clear hazel eyes. "Necessity," he repeated. "Yes, we are all its servants in the end, are we not?" Before Olivia could respond, Thomas strode past her toward the door. "You have my permission to restore the library, Miss Mercer. It would please Mrs. Winters, I think." As autumn deepened toward winter, Thornwick Hall began a slow transformation under Olivia's determined hand. Rooms were aired and cleaned, furniture polished, linens mended. With careful management of the limited household funds, she arranged for essential repairs to the roof and restored heat to sections of the house that had been cold for years. The servants responded to her leadership with increasing enthusiasm, taking pride once more in their work as Thornwick began to shed its neglected appearance. Even Thomas noticed the changes, though he made no comment as fresh flowers appeared in the entrance hall or as the persistent draught that had plagued his study mysteriously abated. It was the restoration of the portrait gallery that finally provoked a direct confrontation. Olivia had discovered the covered paintings during her inspection of the West Wing and had taken it upon herself to remove the dusty sheets, clean the frames, and arrange for the windows to be unshuttered to provide natural light. Thomas found her there one December afternoon, standing before a portrait of a beautiful young woman with auburn hair and a gentle smile, his late wife, the Duchess. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice echoing harshly in the long gallery. Olivia turned, startled by his sudden appearance. "Your Grace, who gave you permission to uncover these portraits?" His face was pale with anger. "No one, Your Grace," she admitted. You thought, he interrupted. "It is not your place to think, Miss Mercer. It is your place to follow instructions, and I do not recall instructing you to meddle with private family matters." Olivia straightened, her own temper flaring at his tone. With respect, Your Grace, these portraits are part of Thornwick's heritage. They were suffering damage from improper storage. They are my property to damage as I see fit, Thomas said coldly. Including the memory of your wife. The words escaped before Olivia could reconsider them. Thomas stared at her, shock momentarily displacing anger. No servant had dared speak to him in such a manner since his bereavement. You forget yourself, Miss Mercer, he said quietly. Perhaps I do, she acknowledged, her voice softening. But hiding her away doesn't honor her memory, Your Grace. And I think she would not wish to see Thornwick, or you, in such neglect. Thomas's expression hardened. You presume to know what my wife would wish? You, a stranger who never met her. I know what it is to lose someone precious, Olivia replied. My father died 2 years ago. For months, I couldn't bear to look at his books, his pipe, anything that reminded me of him. But eventually I realized that avoiding the pain also meant avoiding the joy of remembrance. The Duke was silent, his gaze moving from Olivia to the portrait of his wife. Cover them again, he said finally. All of them. Olivia watched him stride away, her heart heavy with the knowledge that she had overstepped. That evening, she penned a letter of resignation, placing it on Mrs. Winter's desk before retiring to her room. But morning brought an unexpected summons to the Duke's study, where Thomas stood by the window, his back to the door as Olivia entered. Mrs. Winters tells me you intend to leave Thornwick, he said without preamble. Yes, Your Grace. I believe it would be best. Thomas turned, his expression unreadable. Because of our disagreement. Because I spoke out of turn, Olivia clarified. It was not my place to comment on personal matters. No, he agreed, it was not. And yet. He hesitated, then continued with visible effort. Your words, while presumptuous, were not entirely without merit. Olivia remained silent, uncertain how to respond. The portrait gallery remains covered, Thomas continued. I am not yet ready for what you suggest. But I would ask that you withdraw your resignation. The improvements to Thornwick under your management have been noticeable. It was as close to an apology as she was likely to receive from a man of his station. Olivia considered for a moment, then nodded. Very well, Your Grace. I will stay. Good. Thomas nodded stiffly. That will be all, Miss Mercer. As Christmas approached, Thornwick Hall continued its revival. Olivia oversaw the traditional decorations, holly and evergreen boughs, candles in the windows, a Yule log prepared for the great hearth in the main hall. The remaining servants embraced the festivities with enthusiasm, grateful for the return of traditions long neglected. Thomas observed these preparations with a mixture of reluctance and nascent interest. He had forbidden Christmas celebration since the deaths of his wife and son, unable to bear the reminder of their absence during what had once been a season of joy. But as the scent of pine and spices filled the house, as servants moved with lighter steps and occasionally dared to hum carols under their breath, he found himself drawn into the changed atmosphere despite his resistance. On Christmas Eve, after dinner had been served and cleared, Thomas surprised both himself and his staff by appearing in the servants' hall as they gathered for their own modest celebration. A hush fell over the room as he entered, the servants rising hastily to their feet. Please, he said, gesturing for them to be seated. I did not come to interrupt your gathering. His gaze found Olivia, who stood near the small tree the servants had decorated with homemade ornaments and bits of ribbon. Miss Mercer, might I have a word? Olivia followed him into the corridor, wondering what infraction she had committed now. I wanted to thank you, Thomas said awkwardly once they were alone. For restoring Christmas to Thornwick. I realize now that I have been unfair to those who serve here, denying them celebrations because of my own grief. Olivia's expression softened. Grief follows its own timeline, Your Grace. There is no right or wrong way to experience it. Perhaps not, he acknowledged. But there comes a point when clinging to grief becomes a selfish act. He paused, then added more quietly, Elizabeth, my wife, loved Christmas most of all. She would have been dismayed to see it banished from Thornwick. It was the first time he had voluntarily spoken his wife's name in Olivia's presence. She recognized the significance of the moment but kept her response measured. Then perhaps this year's celebration honors her memory in its own way. Thomas nodded slowly. I believe it does. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in simple brown paper. This is for you. A token of appreciation for your service to Thornwick. Surprised, Olivia accepted the package. Thank you, Your Grace. That's most unexpected. Open it later, he said, suddenly awkward again. And please, convey my good wishes to the staff for a happy Christmas. As he turned to leave, Olivia called after him, Will you not join us, Your Grace? There is plum pudding, and the cook has prepared wassail. Thomas hesitated, temptation briefly visible on his features before he shook his head. Another time, perhaps. Good night, Miss Mercer. Later, alone in her room, Olivia unwrapped the Duke's gift, a delicate silver bookmark engraved with a pattern of lilies. Accompanying it was a brief note in his precise handwriting, for the woman who reminded me that knowledge preserved is never wasted. T.M. She traced the engraving with her fingertip, wondering at the unexpected thoughtfulness of the gift. The Duke of Halewood remained an enigma, cold and distant one moment, capable of surprising perception the next. Despite her best efforts to maintain professional detachment, Olivia found herself increasingly drawn to the complexity beneath his reserved exterior. January brought heavy snows that isolated Thornwick Hall from the neighboring villages. The Duke, who typically spent little time engaged with the household, found himself increasingly in Olivia's company as they worked to address the challenges of the harsh weather, ensuring adequate supplies, maintaining heat throughout the occupied portions of the house, and keeping pathways clear. During one particularly fierce blizzard, they found themselves trapped in the library after inspecting a leak in an adjacent corridor. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows as Olivia built up the fire and Thomas paced restlessly. We may be here some time, she observed. The storm shows no sign of abating. Thomas paused by a bookshelf, running his fingers along the now clean spines. At least we have reading material to pass the hours. Olivia smiled. Indeed. What would you recommend, Your Grace? You must have favorites among your collection. Thomas hesitated, then selected a volume and handed it to her. Byron. Elizabeth and I often read poetry aloud on winter evenings. Olivia accepted the book, noting the well-worn pages that suggested frequent reading. Would you care to continue the tradition tonight? The storm provides a dramatic backdrop for Byron's romanticism. To her surprise, Thomas nodded and gestured toward the chairs arranged before the fire. You begin, Miss Mercer. Your voice is. He paused, seemingly searching for an appropriate description. Expressive. They passed the evening taking turns reading poems as the storm raged outside. Olivia observed the gradual relaxation of Thomas's rigid posture as the hours progressed, the way his voice softened when he read lines that clearly held personal meaning. When the clock struck midnight, she closed the book reluctantly. The storm has lessened, Thomas noted, rising to his feet. We should be able to return to our respective quarters now. Yes, of course. Olivia stood as well, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the evening they had shared. Thank you for the poetry, Your Grace. It was a welcome diversion from the storm. Thomas regarded her thoughtfully. You read beautifully, Miss Mercer. Your father's influence, I presume. Yes, she acknowledged. He was a scholar by inclination, though circumstances forced him into trade. He believed literature should be experienced, allowed to be fully appreciated. He sounds like a remarkable man. He was. Olivia's expression softened with memory. He gave me everything he could: education, appreciation for beauty, moral guidance, everything except financial security. And your mother? Died when I was young. It was just the two of us until his passing. She hesitated, then added, his business failed in the last years of his life. There were debts, it's why I entered service. Thomas studied her with new understanding. You were not born to this life. Few choose their circumstances, Your Grace, she replied with a small smile. We simply make the best of what we're given. Indeed. He moved toward the door, then paused. Perhaps we might continue our literary explorations on another evening, Miss Mercer. The library has been too long without voices. I would like that very much, Your Grace. As winter gradually yielded to spring, these literary evenings became a regular occurrence. Twice weekly, after the household duties were complete, Olivia would join Thomas in the library where they explored his extensive collection, moving from poetry to novels, historical accounts to philosophical treatises. Their discussions grew increasingly animated as Thomas revealed a mind sharpened by extensive education and natural intelligence, while Olivia demonstrated knowledge that belied her current station. The household staff observed these developments with cautious optimism. The Duke was still reserved, still prone to periods of melancholy, but the crushing weight of grief that had defined him for 3 years seemed to be lifting. He began taking meals in the dining room rather than his study, started riding again in the mornings, and occasionally asked Mrs. Winters about household matters that had long been beneath his notice. Spring brought new challenges and opportunities to Thornwick. With the improved weather, Olivia turned her attention to the neglected gardens, consulting with the elderly gardener who had remained despite reduced circumstances. These were once the pride of the county, Mr. Simmons told her as they surveyed the overgrown pathways and untended beds. Her Grace had a particular fondness for roses. That section there, he pointed to a wild tangle of thorny growth, was her special project. Had varieties from all over the world, she did. Olivia regarded the rose garden thoughtfully. Could it be restored, do you think? With enough hands and care, miss. But it would take more than I can manage alone. I'll speak to the Duke, Olivia promised. She found Thomas in his study that afternoon, reviewing correspondence that no longer gathered dust before being attended to. Your Grace, she began after he acknowledged her knock, I've been speaking with Mr. Simmons about the gardens. Thomas set down his pen. And what is the verdict? They could be beautiful again, with proper attention. Particularly the rose garden. A shadow crossed Thomas's features. The rose garden was my wife's project. Yes, Mr. Simmons mentioned that. Olivia stepped closer to his desk. I thought perhaps restoring it might be a fitting tribute to her memory. Thomas was silent for a long moment. You seem determined to resurrect the past, Miss Mercer. Not the past, Your Grace, she corrected gently. But the beauty that still exists beneath the neglect. Thornwick deserves to shine again. He studied her, noting the earnestness in her expression. You've become quite attached to Thornwick in a short time. It's a remarkable place, she acknowledged. Even in its current state, its character shines through. And those who serve here care deeply for it, and for you, Your Grace. Thomas looked momentarily startled by this assertion. The staff has little reason to care for a master who has ignored them for years. On the contrary, Olivia countered. They understand grief. Many have served Thornwick for decades and feel its decline as keenly as you must. They would welcome the opportunity to restore it to its former glory. After a pause, Thomas nodded. Very well, Miss Mercer. You have my permission to proceed with the garden restoration. Consult with Mr. Simmons regarding additional labor required. Thank you, Your Grace. Olivia turned to leave but was halted by his voice. Miss Mercer. She looked back. Yes, Your Grace. Why do you care so much about Thornwick? You've been here less than a year. Olivia considered the question carefully. I believe in preserving beauty and history. And? She hesitated, then continued with quiet conviction, I believe in second chances. For places and for people. Their eyes held for a moment before Thomas looked away, discomfort evident in his posture. That will be all, Miss Mercer. The garden restoration commenced with enthusiasm as Olivia hired local labourers to assist Mr. Simmons. Thomas observed the activity from a distance initially, but gradually began to take an interest, occasionally walking the grounds to inspect progress and even offering suggestions based on his memories of the gardens in their prime. One evening in late May, he encountered Olivia in the rose garden, kneeling beside a newly planted bush, her hands covered in soil despite the late hour. You work beyond what could reasonably be expected, Miss Mercer, he commented, causing her to look up in surprise. Your Grace. She scrambled to her feet, brushing ineffectually at the dirt on her apron. I didn't hear you approach. Clearly. His gaze traveled over the transformed garden, where order was gradually emerging from chaos. Your dedication is commendable. Thank you, Your Grace. She followed his gaze, her expression softening with pride. The heritage roses are beginning to recover nicely. Mr. Simmons believes several rare varieties have survived the neglect. Elizabeth would be pleased, Thomas said quietly. She spent hours here, even when. He trailed off, the memory evidently still painful. Even when? Olivia prompted gently. Thomas hesitated, then continued, even when she was expecting our son. The doctor advised rest, but she insisted that gardening was restful for her spirit if not her body. His expression darkened. Perhaps if she had been less stubborn. You cannot know that, Your Grace, Olivia said softly. Childbirth and fever take even the strongest women, regardless of their activities beforehand. You speak from experience. My mother died bringing my younger brother into the world, she explained. He survived only a few hours. My father never blamed her for walking in the garden the day before, or for anything else. Some outcomes lie beyond our control or understanding. Thomas studied her thoughtfully. You have known more sorrow than your years would suggest, Miss Mercer. As have you, Your Grace. She met his gaze steadily. But I've also known joy. As have you. Once, he acknowledged. It seems a lifetime ago. Joy can return, she said simply. If we allow it. The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken sentiment. Thomas took a step closer, close enough that Olivia could see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes. You speak with remarkable confidence, Miss Mercer. Olivia, she corrected softly. My name is Olivia. For a moment, it seemed he might reach for her, but instead, Thomas stepped back, reasserting the distance their positions demanded. It grows late. You should retire, Miss Mercer. The garden will wait for tomorrow. As summer progressed, Thornwick Hall continued its transformation. Word spread through the county of the Duke's apparent return to society, and invitations began to arrive, tentatively at first, then with increasing frequency as it became clear that Halewood was no longer the recluse he had been. Thomas accepted select invitations, appearing at dinners and garden parties where he was received with curiosity and, gradually, renewed respect as he demonstrated that his social skills, though rusty from disuse, remained intact. The local gentry, who had long lamented the withdrawal of one of their most prominent members, welcomed his re-emergence with enthusiasm. Gossip inevitably followed. Speculation about the Duke's changed circumstances circulated through drawing rooms and at tea tables across the county. Some credited Time's healing influence, others whispered of financial necessity forcing him back into society, but increasingly, rumors centered on the mysterious new housekeeper at Thornwick Hall, a woman who, it was said, spoke and carried herself more like a lady than a servant. These whispers eventually reached Thornwick in the form of a visit from Lady Eleanor Pembroke, the Duke's maternal aunt and one of the few relatives who had maintained contact during his self-imposed isolation. Thomas, my dear, she declared as she swept into the drawing room where he received her, I had to see for myself if the rumors were true. You look positively alive. Thomas accepted her enthusiastic embrace with a wry smile. I was unaware that reports of my resurrection were circulating, Aunt. Don't be obtuse, dear boy. Everyone is talking about the remarkable changes at Thornwick. She settled herself on a sofa, appraising the freshly cleaned room with approval. And about the woman responsible. Thomas's expression cooled slightly. I assume you refer to Miss Mercer, my housekeeper. Housekeeper? Lady Eleanor snorted delicately. Come now, Thomas. I may be advanced in years, but I'm not blind. No mere housekeeper transforms an estate, and its master, so thoroughly in less than a year. Miss Mercer is exceptionally competent, Thomas said stiffly. I'm sure she is, dear. Lady Eleanor's eyes twinkled with mischief. And is she also exceptionally pretty? The rumors suggest as much. Aunt Eleanor, Thomas warned, you tread on inappropriate ground. Inappropriate? She laughed. Thomas, you're a widower of 3 years, still young and in possession of a title and estate. What would be inappropriate would be to ignore a suitable companion merely because of societal expectations. Miss Mercer is my employee, he said firmly. Nothing more. Lady Eleanor studied him with shrewd eyes. Your heightened color suggests otherwise, nephew. But very well, I shall drop the subject, for now. She rose to her feet. I insist on meeting this paragon of household management before I depart, however. Ring for her, if you would. Reluctantly, Thomas complied. When Olivia arrived moments later, he performed the introduction with palpable discomfort. Miss Mercer, this is my aunt, Lady Eleanor Pembroke. Aunt, Miss Olivia Mercer. Olivia curtsied with perfect grace. Lady Pembroke, it's an honor. Lady Eleanor appraised the younger woman with undisguised curiosity. Miss Mercer. I've heard much about the improvements you've implemented at Thornwick. Most impressive. Thank you, my lady, but the credit belongs to the entire staff. They have worked tirelessly. Under your direction, I understand. Lady Eleanor glanced at Thomas, then back to Olivia. Tell me, Miss Mercer, where did you acquire your obvious talents for estate management? Olivia hesitated, conscious of Thomas's gaze. I observed carefully during my previous positions, my lady, and had the benefit of guidance from my father, who had some experience in such matters. Indeed. Lady Eleanor's eyebrows rose. And what was your father's profession, if I may ask? He was a merchant, my lady, Olivia replied, her chin lifting slightly. But educated beyond his station, as I believe his grace once observed. Thomas frowned at this reference to their earlier conversation, but Lady Eleanor merely nodded. Education is never wasted, regardless of station. You've done wonders with Thornwick, Miss Mercer. Perhaps you might show me the gardens I've heard so much about. It would be my pleasure, Lady Pembroke. As the women departed, Thomas watched them with a sense of foreboding. His aunt's interest in Olivia suggested complications he had been avoiding confronting, chief among them his own growing feelings for a woman whose position made her an impossible choice for the Duke of Halewood. After Lady Eleanor's departure, a subtle shift occurred in the relationship between Thomas and Olivia. Their literary evenings continued, but a new tension underlay their conversations, an awareness of boundaries that had blurred and now needed to be re-established. Thomas found himself increasingly distracted by Olivia's presence, noticing the graceful movement of her hands as she turned pages, the changing expressions that flitted across her features as they discussed literature, the quiet intelligence that informed her every observation. He recognized the danger in these thoughts but seemed powerless to redirect them. Olivia, too, felt the change. The Duke's gaze lingered on her when he thought she wasn't aware, and she found herself taking unnecessary care with her appearance despite the modesty her position demanded. Their conversations often included lengthy silences filled with unspoken sentiments that propriety forbade expressing. The situation came to a head during preparations for the Midsummer Festival that Thornwick was hosting for the first time in years. The event, which would include tenants and local gentry alike, represented Thornwick's official return to county society and required extensive planning. Olivia was reviewing final arrangements with Thomas in his study when a messenger arrived with an urgent letter. Thomas read it with a deepening frown, his expression darkening with each line. "Is something wrong, Your Grace?" Olivia asked when he set the letter aside with uncharacteristic force. "It appears that our guest list requires adjustment," he said tersely. "Lord and Lady Marshall have added their nephew to their party, and Mr. Gerald Maxwell." Olivia went very still, the color draining from her face. "Maxwell? You're certain?" Thomas regarded her with sudden intensity. "You know the name." "I?" Olivia hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I know of Mr. Maxwell." "In what capacity?" She looked away, her hands clasping tightly in her lap. It was Mr. Maxwell's family. My father served as business manager in his final years. When the business failed, Mr. Maxwell was particularly vindictive in his pursuit of debts. I see. Thomas studied her pale features. There seems to be more to the story than financial matters. Olivia rose abruptly and moved to the window, her back to Thomas as she gathered her composure. Mr. Maxwell made certain offers that he suggested would eliminate my father's debts. I declined. He was not accustomed to rejection and made his displeasure known in ways that made my continued presence in London untenable. Thomas stood, anger evident in the rigid line of his shoulders. He compromised you. He tried, Olivia corrected, turning to face him. He did not succeed, but the rumors he spread were enough to damage my reputation. Hence my need to seek employment far from London. And now he appears at Thornwick, Thomas said grimly. The coincidence seems unlikely. Perhaps he is unaware of my presence here, Olivia suggested, though her tone lacked conviction. Perhaps. Thomas paced the length of the study. Regardless, I cannot uninvite the marshals without causing offense. They are influential in the county. I understand, Your Grace. Olivia straightened her shoulders. I shall make myself scarce during the festival. As housekeeper, I can easily remain behind the scenes. That would be prudent, Thomas agreed reluctantly. Though it pains me to think of you hiding in your own home. The slip, referring to Thornwick as Olivia's home rather than her place of employment, hung in the air between them, acknowledged but not discussed as they returned to the festival preparations with forced focus. The day of the Midsummer Festival dawned clear and warm, as if nature itself approved of Thornwick's return to society. Tents had been erected on the south lawn, tables laden with refreshments arranged beneath them. Musicians played near the newly restored rose garden, which had been opened for guests to admire. Thomas greeted visitors with a graciousness that surprised those who remembered his previous coldness. If his smiles sometimes seemed forced, if his gaze occasionally scanned the servants moving efficiently among the guests, few noticed or commented. Olivia had kept her word, remaining in the house to oversee the domestic arrangements while Mrs. Winters represented the household staff at the festivities. She worked methodically, focusing on tasks that required attention rather than dwelling on the gathering outside or the unwelcome visitor who had prompted her withdrawal. Her strategy succeeded until late afternoon, when she entered the small sitting room adjacent to the drawing room to check on the refreshments that would be needed when guests moved indoors. She was arranging cups on a silver tray when the door opened behind her. Well, well. Miss Olivia Mercer, as I live and breathe. Olivia froze at the familiar voice, then slowly turned to face Gerald Maxwell, who stood in the doorway with a triumphant smile. He was handsome in the conventional sense, tall, well-dressed, with regular features, but his eyes held a coldness that belied his pleasant expression. Mr. Maxwell, she acknowledged stiffly. This area is not open to guests at present. Come now, Olivia, he said, advancing into the room and closing the door behind him. Surely old friends need not stand on ceremony. We were never friends, Mr. Maxwell. She moved a step around him, but he blocked her path. Perhaps not, but we could have been so much more. His smile hardened. I was quite surprised to hear rumors of a Miss Mercer working as housekeeper at Thornwick Hall. Imagine my delight when I confirmed it was indeed my elusive Olivia. I am not yours, Mr. Maxwell, nor will I ever be. She kept her voice steady despite the fear rising within her. Please step aside and allow me to pass. Not before we've had a proper reunion. He reached for her arm. You've led me on quite a chase, my dear. London society quickly lost interest in your fall from grace, but I never forgot how you humiliated me with your refusal. Olivia jerked away from his touch. A lady's refusal should be respected, Mr. Maxwell, not treated as a challenge to be overcome. A lady? He laughed harshly. You forfeited that title when your father's disgrace was revealed. You're nothing but a servant now, Olivia. A position much better suited to your true worth. And yet still too good for your company, came a cold voice from the doorway. They both turned to find Thomas standing there, his expression thunderous as he surveyed the scene before him. Your Grace, Maxwell stammered, immediately adopting a more deferential tone. "I was just renewing an old acquaintance." "So I gathered," Thomas replied icily. "Miss Mercer, are you well?" "Yes, Your Grace," Olivia managed, relief evident in her voice. "Then please inform Mrs. Winters that Mr. Maxwell will be departing Thornwick immediately. His aunt and uncle will be notified that he was taken suddenly ill and required transportation back to their estate." Maxwell's face flushed with anger. "Now see here, Halewood, no, Mr. Maxwell, you will see." Thomas stepped fully into the room, his height and bearing suddenly imposing. "You will leave my home without further conversation with Miss Mercer or any other member of my household. You will not return to Thornwick under any circumstances. And should I hear of you spreading malicious rumors about Miss Mercer or attempting to contact her in any way, I will ensure that every door in London and the counties is closed to you permanently." "You would take the word of a servant over a gentleman?" Maxwell demanded incredulously. "I would take Miss Mercer's word over that of a dozen so-called gentlemen," Thomas replied without hesitation. "Now leave, before I have you escorted out in full view of all our guests." Maxwell glared at them both, his composure cracking to reveal the pettiness beneath. "This isn't finished," he spat, then stormed from the room. As his footsteps receded, Olivia released a shaky breath. "Thank you, Your Grace. I fear I would have struggled to extract myself from that situation without your intervention." Thomas moved to her side, concern evident in his features. "Did he harm you?" "No," she assured him. "Merely unpleasant threats and unwanted attention, as before." Thomas's jaw tightened. "I should have him horsewhipped." Despite the tension of the moment, Olivia found herself smiling at his vehemence. "While I appreciate the sentiment, Your Grace, I believe your approach was more effective. Mr. Maxwell values his social standing above all else. The threat of its loss will likely ensure his cooperation. Nevertheless, I will have inquiries made to confirm his departure from the area." Thomas hesitated, then added more softly, "I would not have you live in fear, Olivia." The use of her given name, the first time he had spoken it, sent a tremor through her that had nothing to do with fear. "I have never felt safer than at Thornwick, Your Grace." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the barriers of position and propriety seemed to dissolve. Thomas lifted his hand as if to touch her cheek, then dropped it back to his side, reality reasserting itself. "You should join the festival," he said, his voice resuming its more formal tone. "The Rose Garden is at its peak, and you deserve to see your work appreciated by our guests." "That wouldn't be appropriate, Your Grace," Olivia reminded him gently. "I am still the housekeeper, despite your gallant defense." Something flashed in Thomas's eyes, frustration, perhaps, or resignation. "Yes, of course. Forgive my momentary lapse in judgment." He moved toward the door. "I should return to our guests. Will you be all right?" "Perfectly, Your Grace," she assured him, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. After the Midsummer Festival, which was hailed as a triumphant return for Thornwick Hall in county society, Thomas found himself increasingly restless. The encounter with Maxwell had forced him to confront feelings he had been avoiding, feelings that complicated his relationship with Olivia beyond what propriety would allow. Their literary evenings continued, but a new formality had entered their interactions, as if both recognized the dangerous territory they approached and silently agreed to retreat to safer ground. Thomas found himself missing the easy conversation they had once shared, even as he acknowledged the necessity of distance. Lady Eleanor's visit in early August only heightened his discomfort. She arrived unannounced one afternoon, sweeping into the study where Thomas was reviewing estate accounts. "Nephew," she declared without preamble, "you are being remarkably stupid." Thomas looked up with a sigh. "A pleasure as always, aunt." "To what particular stupidity do you refer?" "Your housekeeper, of course." Lady Eleanor settled herself in a chair across from him. "Or rather, your refusal to acknowledge what is plainly evident to anyone with eyes." "And what would that be?" Thomas asked, his tone deliberately bland. "That you're in love with the girl," Lady Eleanor said bluntly. "And unless I'm very much mistaken, she returns the sentiment." Thomas set down his pen carefully. Aunt Eleanor, while I appreciate your concern for my welfare, Miss Mercer is employed at Thornwick. Any attachment would be inappropriate. Nonsense, she snorted. You're a widower, she's unmarried, and from what I've observed, she's far better educated and more refined than many of the eligible daughters paraded before you at county gatherings. She is my housekeeper, Thomas emphasized. A temporary condition, I should think. Lady Eleanor leaned forward. Thomas, I've made inquiries. This caught his attention. What sort of inquiries? About Miss Mercer's background. She smiled at his sudden alertness. Her father was Edward Mercer, a scholar-turned-merchant who managed the Maxwell Trading Company until its collapse 2 years ago. He was respected, educated at Cambridge, and while not wealthy, the family was comfortably situated until the business failed. Thomas frowned. Maxwell, the same family as Gerald Maxwell. The very same. Young Gerald's father owned the company. Lady Eleanor's expression hardened. There were rumors about the circumstances of its failure, suggestions that the elder Maxwell's risky investments were primarily responsible, but that Edward Mercer was made the scapegoat. That aligns with what I know of the son's character, Thomas muttered. But why are you telling me this, Aunt? Because, my dear boy, Miss Mercer may be employed as your housekeeper, but her background, education, and deportment are those of a gentlewoman fallen on hard times. There would be talk, certainly, if you were to elevate her position in a more personal capacity, but nothing that could not be overcome with time and the proper handling of society. Thomas stared at his aunt, astonishment giving way to a dawning hope he scarcely dared acknowledge. You're suggesting that marriage to Olivia would be acceptable? I'm suggesting, Lady Eleanor replied with a triumphant smile, that happiness is too rare a commodity to sacrifice on the altar of rigid social conventions. Especially for a man who has already known profound loss. She rose to her feet. Now, I believe I'll take tea in the drawing-room and perhaps have a word with your exceptional housekeeper. After his aunt's departure, Thomas remained at his desk, his mind racing with possibilities he had previously forbidden himself to consider. The idea that Olivia, his Olivia, as he had come to think of her in the privacy of his thoughts, might be within his reach after all was both exhilarating and terrifying. But doubts quickly followed. Even if society might eventually accept such a match, would Olivia herself welcome his attentions? He had offered her employment, security, and lately, protection, but never his heart. Indeed, he had been careful to maintain the distance their positions demanded, even when his feelings suggested otherwise. And what of his own reservations? Thomas had loved Elizabeth deeply, had built his life around her and their shared dreams of family. Her death, and that of their infant son, had shattered him so completely that he had sworn never to risk such pain again. Did he dare to open himself to the possibility of both joy and loss once more? These questions occupied him throughout the day and into the evening, until he found himself standing outside the library where Olivia waited for their regular literary discussion. He paused, hand on the doorknob, gathering courage before entering. Olivia looked up from the book she was reading, her face brightening at his appearance. Your Grace. I wasn't certain you would join me this evening. Lady Eleanor's visit seemed to leave you preoccupied. My aunt has that effect, Thomas acknowledged, taking the chair opposite her. She has strong opinions and little hesitation in expressing them. So I gathered during our conversation at tea, Olivia said with a small smile. She is quite formidable. What did she discuss with you? Thomas asked, suddenly concerned about his aunt's interference. Olivia's cheeks colored slightly. Various matters. She was particularly interested in my father's scholarly pursuits and my own education. I see. Thomas studied her carefully. Aunt Eleanor has always been curious about those who capture her interest. She mentioned that she had known my father slightly, years ago when he was still at Cambridge. Olivia hesitated, then added, she also spoke of you, Your Grace. Of your life before your loss. Thomas tensed. Did she? She said you were once known for your laughter, Olivia said softly. That music and dancing were regular occurrences at Thornwick, and that you had a particular talent for making people feel valued and heard. That was a different man, Thomas replied, discomfort evident in his posture. A man who believed in permanence and happy endings. And now? Olivia asked, her gaze direct. Thomas met her eyes, finding himself unable to dissemble in the face of her quiet inquiry. Now I find myself questioning whether joy is worth the inevitable pain of its loss. All joy ends, Your Grace, she said gently. Whether through death or mere change of circumstance. But that doesn't diminish its value while we hold it. You speak from experience. Yes. She smiled, a hint of sadness in her expression. I knew the joy of my father's love and guidance for 24 years. His loss was devastating, yet I would not trade a moment of that joy to avoid the pain that followed. Thomas leaned forward, suddenly intent. And would you risk such pain again, Olivia? Knowing its depth. The use of her given name startled her, but she answered without hesitation. Yes. Without question. Something shifted in Thomas's expression, a softening, a vulnerability rarely displayed. I find myself envying your courage. It isn't courage, Your Grace, she replied. Merely the recognition that a life without connection is no life at all. They sat in silence for a moment, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Thomas, he said finally. If we are to speak of matters beyond employer and employee, I would have you use my name. Olivia's eyes widened slightly. That would be most improper, Your Grace. As improper as the thoughts I've harbored these past months, he asked quietly. As improper as the way my heart lightens when you enter a room, or how I find myself measuring each day by the moment spent in your company. Thomas, she whispered, the name foreign yet natural on her lips. What are you saying? He rose and moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. I'm saying, Olivia Mercer, that you arrived at Thornwick as my housekeeper, but you have become infinitely more. You have brought light and life back to these halls, and to me. Tears gathered in Olivia's eyes. Your position, society would never, society will adapt, Thomas interrupted firmly. As my aunt took pains to remind me today. What I cannot adapt to is the thought of losing you, of watching you leave Thornwick as you nearly did after our disagreement in the portrait gallery. I never wanted to leave, Olivia admitted, her voice barely audible. Even then. Then don't. Thomas lifted one hand to gently cup her cheek. Stay, not as my housekeeper, but as my wife. If you could find it in your heart to accept a man who has been half alive these past years, who is still learning to hope again. Olivia's tears spilled over at last. You cannot know what you offer, she protested weakly. My circumstances, my reputation after Maxwell's slander, I know exactly what I offer, Thomas said firmly. A life that will certainly include challenges from society, but also the promise of facing them together. As for Maxwell's slander, it holds no weight against the truth of your character, which I have observed daily for nearly a year. He hesitated, then asked the question that mattered most. Can you love me, Olivia? Not the Duke of Halewood, but Thomas Maddox, with all his flaws and griefs. I already do, she confessed, her voice steadying as she made her choice. I have for months, though I never dared hope. Thomas stopped her words with a kiss, gentle at first, then deepening as she responded, her hands reaching up to frame his face. When they finally parted, both were breathing unevenly, wonder and joy mingling in their expressions. Is that your answer, then? Thomas asked, a smile, his first true smile in years, transforming his features. Yes, Olivia replied without hesitation. Yes, Thomas, I will marry you. Their wedding took place in October, when Thornwick's gardens blazed with autumn colours. Lady Eleanor, delighted with her role in the match, managed society's response with expert diplomacy, ensuring that the most influential families in the county attended despite initial raised eyebrows over the Duke's choice of bride. The ceremony itself was simple but elegant, held in the small chapel on Thornwick's grounds. Olivia wore a gown of ivory silk, designed by the finest modiste in London at Lady Eleanor's insistence. Thomas, watching her approach the altar, felt a surge of gratitude so profound it bordered on pain, gratitude for second chances, for the courage to risk his heart once more. "You look beautiful," he whispered as she reached his side. "Happy," she corrected with a radiant smile. "I look happy, Thomas. As do you." And he was. As they spoke their vows before family, friends, and the staff of Thornwick Hall, who had embraced their former housekeeper's elevation with genuine joy, Thomas Maddox, Duke of Halewood, recognized that the greatest risk of his life had already yielded the greatest reward, the return of joy, long thought lost, found again in the most unexpected of places.